Let's go ahead.
Okay. My name is Jack Middlebrook. I was born in Seattle, Washington, March 21st, 1936, at 2711 West Dravis Street.
Wow. That's a
In
little
the
bit of
house.
memory. Yeah.
That's a good memory.
In
yeah.
the family house.
In the family house, and it's still there.
Right.
We lived on Magnolia Bluff, and I started grade school at Magnolia School, which is now closed, on Magnolia Bluff. In 1944, the parents bought a house, 5102 East 42nd Street in Laurelhurst, an area on Lake Washington in Seattle. And I continued on to grade school there. From grade school, I went to John Marshall Middle School, and then as a student at Lakeside High School for my
were there also.
Yep.
Yeah.
For my freshman through junior years, and I left Lakeside, went to Roosevelt High School for a couple of months, and then when Dad got sick and passed away, I went to Palo Alto, California.
Oh, okay.
To live with my uncle Norm, because my mom and grandfather were going to be away from Seattle for a while after Dad died. I was in Palo Alto for 6 months, attended Redwood High School, and then Menlo Atherton High School. And in the winter, 1953, I left Palo Alto and came to Missoula, Montana to live with my brother Bill and the family. Graduated from Missoula County High School in 1954.
So did you go, straight into service from there?
I actually worked for a year with the Bureau of Public. In the summertime, I came back to Missoula. When I graduated, I went to the Bureau of Public Roads and worked up around Lolo Pass and Lolo Hot Springs. And then when that job shut down because of the winter, I went back to Seattle and went to the University of Washington until for the first year. The Korean War was going on at the time, and when I went back to Missoula for a summer job, I felt I wanted to serve the country and took tests for the aviation cadet program, which I passed, and ended up in September of 1955 going into the Air Force, and was sent to Lackland Air Force Base, where I went through basic training until I had a class.
So did you go through basic training like just enlisting in the Air Force?
Just enlisting in the Air Force.
Okay, and then but you were tagged to continue on.
I was
in the aviation.
I had a class assignment, but it wasn't until 56, in the spring of 56.
Was there a particular? I know the Navy had like a V5 program or something. Was there a classification or?
Well, it wasn't classification, but it was. I didn't have the eyesight, didn't pass the test for pilot training, so I went into Navigator's training school, and that was down in Harlingen, Texas. I was there for a year. I graduated in April of 1957.
And so you were in training for Navigator.
Yeah.
What kind of aircraft? Obviously, you had a lot of ground school to learn navigation, all that. But what?
Yeah,
how they
the
trained
only aircraft. The training aircraft was a T-29 twin engine plane. Nice plane to fly in. And we flew several missions in that, and then on my just after the final mission, we had a graduation ceremony, which Mom came back for.
Oh, great.
She came back from Santa Barbara, and being a brand new second lieutenant who thought he had all the money in the world,
Yeah, you bought a Corvette?
I bought a Porsche. A 357 Porsche, and we drove that back across the country to Santa Barbara. My leave before going to Japan. And then I drove up to Missoula, Montana to see friends that I had been in high school with, and the person I went through aviation cadets with, he joined with me. He washed out, and he was back up there in
And by that
Missoula.
time, my mom and dad moved back to Seattle.
They're back to
Okay.
Seattle, yeah.
Which-
But
yeah.
no, your dad was still there, I think. They were still there because while I was there, I totaled the Porsche.
Okay.
And wasn't hurt, luckily. But shortly after that, I had to leave and go to Japan, and your dad took over the handling of the wreck.
The Porsche
Or
wreck.
the Porsche,
Okay.
yeah. And the
Did the insurance company pay out well?
well, yeah, they totaled the car because the insurance agent wanted the engine out of it.
Oh, good. Which company was that?
I don't
Don't remember.
Don't know, and whatever.
Don't want to say.
Anyway, I was fine. I ended up at Travis Air Force Base and flew from there to Hawaii, and then to Wake Island, and into Tokyo International is where we
What,
landed.
was that an MSTS aircraft? I think that
No,
was
it
what
was a USAF. It was a KC. It was a C-97.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got me.
Yeah, ended up in Tokyo and was stationed at Johnson Air Force Base, which was where the Japanese actually trained their kamikaze pilots.
Wow. And so what was the city or town where that was?
Irumagawa was the city was
North,
at.
south, Japan?
It was just outside Tokyo, about maybe 30, 40 miles.
Okay.
And so there, and my assignment was to the 36th Air Rescue Squadron, where I was navigator on SA-16s, which is a seaplane.
Albatross?
Albatross.
Yeah.
And also later on the SC-54, which is the old Douglas DC-4, but it was outfitted for rescue missions.
So what was the hairiest rescue mission you?
One of the most memorable missions was where we did a search off Misawa, which is northern Japan, where a U.S. Air Force pilot and a Russian pilot collided, and we never found any, but we searched for about 3 days, flying out of Misawa for any survivors, and there were none.
What was the U.S. aircraft in that?
It was an F-100.
Okay. Super Sabre. Yeah.
Yeah, Super Sabre. But they had a mid-air collision, got too close, and apparently neither survived. Another mission that was very interesting, we flew at the time, which was top secret classified then. I don't believe it is anymore, but we, in the SC-54s, we would fly support for the reconnaissance B-47s that flew out of Yokota.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and we would take off and fly up and go up over Hokkaido, which is the northernmost island, and then drop down to an altitude of about 100 feet.
Okay, so you're out of the radar envelope.
Out of the radar envelope, and fly north up into the sea of Oshkosh.
Oshkosh, yeah.
Yeah, and our mission was planned so we would turn around the same time the B-47 did, but he was well up in front of us.
Sure.
So we'd get the max coverage up and back. And those were a little hairy. I mean, we never had any known danger from Russian aircraft, but this would be at night, and you'd be flying along, and all of a sudden you'd be over a bunch of lights of fishing villages just a
Oh, yeah,
100
yeah.
feet below you.
Ooh.
It was.
So what was the length of one of those missions?
Those were about 24 hours. We had internal tanks in the 54,
Okay.
and could go for.
And did you have relief crews, or was
No.
it just one crew?
Just we had a relief crew in bunks where we could sleep.
Right.
And go,
Mhm.
yeah. And flew a lot of those, and they were interesting missions. We never had any 47s that had problems either,
Mhm.
but it was. They always said they liked knowing we were there. I don't know if we could have
Sure.
done much or
Now,
not.
were they penetrating Soviet airspace
Yeah,
on
they
those?
were.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, Cold War secrets we don't.
Yeah, and
we
the
now
other,
know.
out of a lot of other missions, but another very fun mission we had is where we ferried an SA-16A model back to Bethpage, New York.
Mhm.
It was being converted to a B model, which are longer wingspan,
Bigger tanks.
bigger
Yeah,
tanks, longer missions. But on that mission we went from Johnson Air Force Base to Iwo Jima to Wake Island. We had to make these hops because we didn't
Right,
have the range.
yeah.
From Wake Island to Midway. From Midway we went down and landed at Hickam.
Mhm.
And we waited there for about 10 days for favorable winds to fly into
Okay. Get continental U.S.
yeah,
Yeah.
San Francisco, Hamilton Air Force Base, which isn't in there anymore, but it's
Mhm.
just under the Golden Gate and to the
Oh,
north of San
okay.
Francisco. But we never got the wind, so they sent us over to Ford Island and put us on the USS Thetis Bay, which is the first.
Mhm.
It was a Marine. It was a carrier for carrying, I think, Marines and helicopters.
Okay.
Interesting. It was a converted cargo ship, and as I recall, it had about a 3-degree list to port because of the island they put on it. But they took us on that. We had it was 5 days to Long Beach.
Okay.
And then they had a crane and dropped us in the water
Mhm.
at Long Beach, and we
Mhm.
took off and then flew across country. We made a couple of stops. I don't remember where they both were. I think one was in Oklahoma City, into Bethpage, Long
Mhm.
Island.
Okay. And how'd you get home?
And we came back commercial.
Mhm.
But
What kind of commercial planes? DC-3s?
No, we came back. There was I think it was United into San Francisco, and then we came back Navy out of Navy Connie
Okay.
from the San Francisco
One-
area.
121.
121 to Hickam, Midway, and then back into Yokota.
Was that an EC-121?
East?
Was that the one with the, they had the radar bulbs?
No,
and then,
no.
Okay,
It was
just a
a
straight.
It was a straight 121
Okay.
for carrying, passengers. A lot of
Mhm.
dependents and stuff on that flight, as I recall,
Okay.
going over.
All right. So, yeah, more of a transport.
Yeah.
So in the SA-16, did you make any water landings?
We used to make them every week, practice, none for rescue purposes per se, but did a lot of practice in Tokyo Bay,
Mhm.
and then down in southern Japan, on Kyushu, just off the coast out there was a base. I don't remember the name of it now. Near the big naval station. What was the naval
Sasebo?
station? Near Sasebo,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But were there any weird quirks, or like Tom, my friend who flew PBMs, he talked about landing and popping rivets?
No,
the
again,
PBM.
not rivets. It was these guys were really well trained, but it was the technique to getting that plane down on the water
Mhm.
and landing right. You fly circles above and look at the wave patterns and
Mhm.
and try and figure out the way you had to approach and where you had to drop down, and then getting off again could be
Mhm.
pretty exciting. We used JADO a lot on that. They'd hang
Oh,
back
yeah,
on the
yeah,
doors
yeah.
and help to get up. But it was interesting, a lot of fun.
Mhm. Okay, so
So
what was your next assignment after?
okay, I spent 4 years in Japan. I extended twice
Mhm.
because I liked it, and we went from They closed they moved the squadron from Johnson Air Base to Tachikawa Air Base because Johnson was reverted back to the Japanese, and we spent a couple more years at Tachi. Some interesting missions, search and rescue into Korea. Again, never recovering anybody, but we'd go over and stay at just outside of Seoul, and there was another base. Not Ashia, that's Japanese, isn't it? Yeah, Ashia was
Yeah,
too bad.
Air Force bases, I'm not the
Yeah,
strongest
no.
guy on. Naval bases, I'm better.
Yeah. But in and out of Korea, it was interesting to be there, and we had a couple of missions where we flew the C-54s to Hong Kong for Iran, where they were all fitted and gone over. And those were always kind of fat cat trips. They were nice.
Oh, yeah.
We had a lot of time down there. But I spent 4 years there and came back in 1961 to Charleston Air Force Base.
Before you did that,
Yeah.
what other countries did you get to visit on Space A or or
At
leave
that
time?
time,
while
at that
you
time,
were
that was
stationed out of
basically
Japan?
just Japan, Korea, and Hong Kong, the Philippines, Iwo Jima,
Mhm.
and that was in Guam. We'd fly Okinawa, Guam. We'd go fly as support for other rescue squadrons in those places. But then, as I came to Charleston in 1961 to the 17th Military Airlift Squadron, Air Transport Squadron. Then it turned to MAC, and flew C-124s.
Okay. Yep. They used to have one there on the base. That
Yeah.
was, I
Yeah,
remember when we got there in
we
the
flew
70s.
the C-124s, and I was there from 1961 to 74, 73. Got about 10,000 hours in the C-124, flew interesting missions, pretty much all over the world. I didn't get around the world. I got, going to the west, I got as far as Thailand.
Okay.
Going to the east, I got as far as Pakistan. So there was just a short distance in before. All that time at Charleston wasn't only in the C-124s. They phased them out, and we were the first squadron in the Air Force to receive the C-5.
Got it. Yep.
And I had been by the time the C-5s came, the 124s were phased out. I was the senior navigator for the 17th Squadron, which phased out. C-5s came into the 3rd Squadron. I went over to the 3rd, and then I went to the wing. I was the wing staff navigator for standardization for it was in the 437th Military Airlift Wing. My boss was Colonel Bob Potts, who landed the first C-5 at Charleston. With Mendel Rivers on board.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, lost a
Big,
tire.
Important guy.
Lost a tire, bounced down the runway. But
it literally came off.
One of the tires came
Isn't there
off.
something on YouTube with that?
Yeah, there is. It's still pretty famous. You can see the tire
I'll put it in,
bouncing
see the tire bouncing down
the runway, yeah.
with all the crowds waiting.
Yeah, a little embarrassing, but there were a lot of other wheels on the airplane, and it taxied in okay. A lot of missions on the C-5 to Vietnam up to Anchorage. You pick up cargo in the States and go up to Anchorage, and then down to Yokota, and then into Vietnam. And even during the 124 times, I flew a lot of missions into Vietnam. I remember going into Saigon, and you could hear the bullets bouncing through the
Really?
back of the airplane. Yeah.
What?
Ping, ping, ping.
So what kind of cargo would you normally take, or is it just it could be anything?
It could
right?
be anything. It could be big equipment, some tanks,
Mhm.
or motorized vehicles. Just a lot of cargo and supplies and things
Mhm.
like that. Even with those planes, we sometimes, and the 141, we would generally bring out bodies.
Mm.
A lot of flag
Yeah,
draped,
yeah.
draped caskets on those
And
airplanes.
did you go straight back to Dover with that, or?
You'd go probably across the Pacific, but a lot of times we'd go out of Saigon to Clark, and then into Midway, into Guam and up to
Mhm.
Hickam and Travis, and then across the country.
Mhm.
Or the 141s, you go through Anchorage and down to Dover.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you went I know you flew 141s at one point, right?
Yeah.
But that was where between the one you said that you were
Between
flying
the-
124s and then you were in C5s.
Yeah, I flew in the 124s when there was, and then when I went to Wing to be the standardization navigator, I flew more 141s because
Mhm.
the C-124 were phasing out.
Mm-hmm.
So I had some time in the 141s and then back in mainly the C5s.
Right.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, when that movie on Netflix, the Battle of J.Ville, came out, and you watched it,
Right.
and you told me
This
you
was-
had brought the Irish.
This is
Company.
This is one of the missions in the 124 in
Oh, okay.
1962. We flew, had a crew. We went to Bermuda, Lodges, and into Châteauroux, France. We spent a couple of weeks there to get all our immunizations, and then we flew into the Belgian Congo.
Mm-hmm.
And we landed at Leopoldville and spent several weeks flying in the Congo. One of the interesting missions, we flew over to Mombasa and took some government officials over there. Spent some time there, and the HMS Hermes was in the harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to go out at the invitation of some of the British Navy guys and have a couple of cocktail hour.
Yeah, exactly.
At the
bar.
Hermes, at the
Yeah.
bar in the Hermes.
Yeah.
And I learned about the rug rule, where there's a rug laid in front of their bar.
I never got to go aboard a British ship,
Yeah.
surprisingly enough. So what's the rug rule?
Well, the rug rule, you go up and you get a drink.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're standing on that rug and blocking someone to get the drink, you got to buy everybody in the room a drink.
That's an important one to
So
know.
they get up, they clear the rug pretty fast. But I thought was an interesting difference from the U.S. Navy, because the British had cocktail hour.
Of course. Now, and the bar was all nice wooden.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was,
One of the interesting things
but it
was
was laid out, as I recall. It was
Yeah.
on the not the flight deck, but the hangar deck.
Mm-hmm.
That's the space they had.
Right,
it in.
yeah. Well, one of the things that when they went to the Falklands War
Yeah.
was on the way down there, they realized all that nice wood stuff
Yeah.
was shrapnel hazard
Yep.
if they got hit. So not only that, but Formica tile, they chipped all that up, and wood and everything went over before they got down to the Falklands.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just a fun fact to having wood aboard
Yeah.
a ship taken into a combat zone.
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
And one of the other interesting trips we had was we flew into, and I can't remember if it was Kindu or Kivu in the Congo. It was the place where an Italian aircrew in a C-119 had gone
Mhm.
in not too long before us. And they stayed overnight there and never woke up. They were butchered by
Oh.
Congolese rebels, and their body parts were sold in the marketplace.
Oh.
That's a true story. Yeah.
So when you were down there, all the stuff, and
Yeah.
what I didn't realize till that movie, The Battle of J.Ville, was Congo was one of the known sources of uranium,
Yep.
yellowcake.
Yep.
And the Soviets had a pretty good revolution going on, right?
Yes, they
the
did.
Congolese,
Yeah.
because that was the big Cold War
Yeah.
countries
Down-
fighting over
yeah.
the source of
Down
stuff
around,
to make atomic weapons,
yeah.
nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Down around, I think down around Stanleyville,
Mhm.
there were some big battles down there. Some nasty fighting. But our last mission in the Congo itself was again, it was either the opposite, Kindu or Kivu. But we went in and picked up some Irish troops that had been UN peacekeepers down
Correct.
there.
Yeah.
And we flew them back. Very interesting. We took out of Leopoldville, which is right on the Congo River, with them and their equipment. And we were pretty heavily loaded, and we took off and wondered why we got the wheels up and over the Congo River and why we couldn't climb.
Oh.
And we had to fly almost an hour burning off fuel before we could start climbing up. And it turns out that our load master and their people had failed to check one of the vehicles, and they were loaded with gas fuel still.
Yep. Yeah.
Very, when you get that much weight in an airplane, it's critical. You plan everything for a takeoff.
Oh yeah, exactly.
They have I think it's like a 20,000 foot runway in the Congo because of the heat. And
right, air density and
air
all
density,
that stuff. Yeah.
So, but we got off, and as soon as the gear up, the Irish commander comes up through the hatch with a bottle in his hand and wanted everybody to have a drink, celebrating their return home. And it was the first bunch of Irish troops. We got back, we went to Tripoli and then into Dublin. And it was the first Irish troops brought back from the Congo. It was pretty nice celebration.
Yep. And you told me you couldn't buy a drink and couldn't buy a meal.
You couldn't buy a drink.
You brought the boys home.
In Dublin, yeah.
Yeah.
It was pretty nice.
Now Tripoli, that's another interesting one.
Yeah.
So we had an Air Force base.
Yeah,
there,
Wheelus.
Right? Wheelus Air Force Base.
Yeah.
That was back in those days when we still.
You go in. You'd go into the Flightline snack bar to get a hamburger, and you were always served in there. It seemed like with a local with one eye. They were.
Yeah. One of my veteran buddies, Colonel Lodenhoff, Marine. We didn't get him on video, but he was exchange tour with the Air Force.
Yeah.
He was a Corsair pilot, and then he went to an F-86 tactical bomber squadron. He was stationed in Wheelus.
Yeah.
And actually, the interesting thing is he was a Marine major commanding officer of an Air Force fighter squadron.
Interesting, yeah.
But only for 3 months.
because
the Air Force majors had a little revolt, because that impacted their promotability when a Marine officer was taking a command slot. So they transitioned him, but then he became one of the toss bombing instructors for the rest of his time with the Marine Corps. But for 3 months, there actually was a Marine Corps major in charge of an Air Force tactical fighter squadron, and it was out of Wheelus. So anyway.
And one other great mission, 124 mission, we had. We went down out of Wheelus and landed in Khartoum.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just, short time before that, read a very interesting book I think by Alan Moorhead, The White Nile, and then he wrote one, The Blue Nile.
Right.
And it's about British history along the Nile River. And when we were in Khartoum, I was able one evening to walk over and stand on the governor's palace in Khartoum, where General Gordon had stood and was killed by the Mahdi's troops in a revolution in Khartoum.
Wow.
Right, and that's right at the confluence of the Blue and the White Nile. And then we went down from there and landed in the airport. Where did the Israeli guerrillas make that raid?
Entebbe.
Entebbe. We landed long before that. We were in Entebbe and stayed at a hotel in Lake Victoria, which was just gorgeous. This was before that ever happened. But we've been to Entebbe too. That's pretty interesting.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so that was, and now, did you get to Pakistan with 124s, or was that later in the C5?
Both.
Okay.
Pakistan. We just landed in Karachi and never around there much. You couldn't get out of that place fast enough.
Yeah, I had some.
It was
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
smelled a little bit.
yeah. Yeah,
Very poor people, a lot of poverty there.
Yeah, but I understand Bangladesh is, it's even worse.
Even worse.
Oh,
Yeah.
And then one of the ships when we were in the Indian Ocean, they got sent up there for a port visit, and they were like, that was bad.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for that part of the world. Okay, so what did you haul in? Just general cargo and stuff?
Most of the time,
up
it's just
Pakistan?
general cargo. Yeah, all over the world. You do supplying embassies. You'd call carry supplies. You'd call just supplies for troops.
Mhm.
It could be just in the 124. It could be anything.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what was their load limit? Do you remember, or is that a loadmaster thing?
It was a loadmaster thing. I think our total weight was 185,000 pounds, but I mean that was the gross takeoff. I can't remember what we carried. That was a long time ago.
And again, did you have relief crews in there? Because I imagine
No,
some of your
usually you didn't.
mission time was about how long on a bag of fuel?
Well, you could go. Some of the longest missions in the 124 were 10, 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You had bunks, good bunk places to sleep, and sometimes you'd carry maybe 3 pilots, a pilot, co-pilot, and a third pilot, and a couple of navigators. One could sleep and one could.
Yeah. No air refueling capability on the
No,
124, right?
not at all. No, 141 eventually, but that was later, and C5 also was later.
Really?
Yeah.
You weren't built with that? Either of those?
We didn't
initially?
ever do them. No, not initially. And so those were the days at Charleston, and then in let's see.
So you transitioned from the wing as
then
the
I
standardization navigator to C.
Yeah, then I went to Vietnam.
Okay.
And that was in just a year before things ended up. So that would have been 73.
71. I mean, we pulled
72.
troops out in 72.
72.
We actually
I went in
supported
70,
them in 75.
I went in 71.
Okay.
And was assigned to the 360th TUS Tactical Electronic Warfare Squadron. It's flying Goonie birds.
Yep. C-47.
C-47s. And our basic job, we'd carry most of them were CIA agents that were bilingual. But we would go up and listen for radio transmissions from the Viet Cong, and when we'd find something close, and it was interesting to these interpreters on board, and we would fly around and take radio bearings and triangulate the location of that headquarters, whatever it would be. And within a very short time, often when we were still there, you'd see the buffs come in.
Ah.
And
Surprise.
They'd carpet bomb that area.
Yeah. So how far away were you when they were executing a raid?
We could see it. We were probably 3 or 4 miles.
I think years ago you told me that no matter where you were, you know, the ground would shake if you were in the vicinity of a B-52 raid.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you had your friend Jim. What was his last name? The bombardier on the B-52s.
Oh boy, and
it's the one who came through Guam, bombed out Anderson for a while. And
right.
We saw him a couple of times. He took us through the B-52s.
Yeah, I'm still trying to think of his name. He passed away a long time ago. He's not coming back right now. Maybe I can.
Yeah. Anyway, but he was.
He was married a friend of ours down in Blackshear, Georgia. Had a daughter down there. But I spent 9 months with the 360th, and then the squadron was transferred to the Vietnamese, and I became a advisor to the Vietnamese for about 2 months, and then I was pulled out. So I didn't quite have a year in Vietnam.
So now the time with the Vietnamese crews,
yeah,
because I ended up working with Saudi Arabian crews, and
Yeah.
it was while we were training U.S. crews,
yeah.
we ended up getting some work to train the Saudi crews. So what was the difference, if you will, in American crews and working with the South Vietnamese crews?
The South Vietnamese crews most of the time would see thunderstorms and bad weather where there wasn't, so they wouldn't have to go where they were supposed to go.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't always
Yeah.
perform the mission the way they should.
Right. So when you were not flying,
Yeah.
and now where were you flying out of?
Ton Son Nhut, Saigon.
Okay, all right.
That's it, yeah.
Do you happen to have any issue? Or well, it was later in the war then at that
Yeah.
point. So were
You
there
could-
any guerrilla attacks there?
There
in
were a couple
Saigon?
of mortar raids.
Yeah.
They were, they'd try and penetrate the perimeters
Mhm.
out there, and you'd get mortar attacks coming in and have to get up and go in a hole someplace. But they never got it, on the base anywhere
Yeah.
near.
Now, as far as leaving the base and going out,
You could go in the base in the daytime. Saigon was still relatively
yeah.
safe, yeah.
Okay.
Especially during the daylight hours.
So what kind of interesting things did you get to see on your off time there from that part of the
You just
world?
go down to, it's an interesting city with the French history there. I had, I can't even remember names now. Someone that I knew back in Charleston knew the American ambassador to Vietnam at the time, and I was invited there for dinner. But that was so long ago and a one-time thing. I don't.
Yeah.
But that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
There was I remember the restaurants were very good. The food was outstanding.
Mhm.
Still. But and then near the end, you didn't leave the base quite as much. I mean, some people did, but
So you were there when we were getting ready to do the whole
ready to go home,
Vietnamization.
yeah.
Well, you
We
obviously
knew it was coming
trained.
down.
Right. So the
I mean,
end was
we
near,
were
so
there.
to speak.
Kissinger came over, and it wasn't long after he visited that started withdrawing people.
Okay.
And, I went back through, took off out of Saigon. Was one of the contract carriers. I think it was Riddle at the time.
Mhm.
Riddle and
The Freedom Bird.
DC-8 back to
Mhm.
Tachikawa and Anchorage and home. Yeah.
You get some time off, 30 days
Yeah,
leave?
I got a little leave then, and,
Mhm.
and I went right back to the 17th in Charleston again.
Okay. So,
Or the 3rd that time. There wasn't any 17th Squadron anymore.
right, okay, so back to the 3rd.
Yeah.
And then that was your final tour? And that
That
was
was
all
the final.
C5?
That was the final tour. I had some back injuries,
Nothing from
leg
the Porsche,
problems.
right?
This was from a long time ago, earlier, yeah.
Mhm.
And so I was taken off flying status, and
Mhm.
I still at Charleston, and I was a squadron section commander for the supply squadron until my retirement.
Okay. So
And that was just a year,
Mhm.
couple of years later. Yeah, I was there
So-
about 2 years.
So interestingly enough, and I talked to some ROTC cadets yesterday that were out running, and I know my career, I never got the job I asked for, but I always ended up with a good job. So
Yeah.
as far as your preferences and where you were going, did you get anything you asked for, or did you get what you got given? And
I got what I got given, and most of it, was progression upwards. It was good up to wing staff navigator, and
Mhm.
that's standardization navigator for all the squadrons.
and how many planes in a squadron?
Well, more than enough crews. I think I'm trying to remember. There are about 35 or 40 crews per squadron, and that would be, I mean, how many people? You had load masters, you had engineers, you had
Right.
pilots, navigators,
Right. Sure. I
administrative people.
I've got a
so-
number in my head, not being the real aviation guy, but I think a Navy squadron is like 12 aircraft.
I was going to say 10 to 12, depending on the
Okay.
transports. Yeah.
And then multiple crews
Yeah.
to
to
Yeah,
fly.
keep them going and be in training status.
And the aircraft there weren't assigned to a specific. They were assigned to the wing, not to a specific squadron.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. And the wing is how many squadrons?
There were 3 at Charleston, and then it went to 2. There was the 3rd, the 41st, and the 17th, and the 41st, which were 41st and 3rd were C-141s.
Mm-hmm.
They used to be all 17s.
Right.
124s, then to 141s. In fact, the 3rd, they went to 130s first. They went from C-124s to C-130s to C-141s. And then the 3rd went to C-5s.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, imagine the 41st was phased out like the 17th was when I was there. We had the 17th and I was in the 124s. Squadron was phased out, the 17th Squadron, in not long before I got out to Vietnam. So it would have been in the early 70s. And the first C-17 aircrafts that came, the jet that replaced the C-5.
Right.
C-17, first one went to the 17th Squadron. They regenerated
at
Charleston.
Yeah, recommissioned, yeah.
Wow.
Wow. So now we talked a little bit about the Albatross and its sort of land in the water thing. So what, as far as the 124 or the 141 or the C-5, were there any like little quirks that you don't read about or hear about? Sort of little detail things of not in the common knowledge base that you just kind of know because you were there.
I'm trying to think if any really stands out. The C-124 looked like it was a big unwieldy aircraft, but it was a great plane to fly in. And it didn't get around all the weather, but it was very comfortable. And you had bunks on a long trip. It was it's a pretty comfortable plane to fly.
You have a little kitchen.
You have a little kitchen. Yeah, you take frozen meals. You had to. They weren't microwaves then. They were heat ovens and things, but it was good. And you could not help but just wonder at the size of that plane every time you'd fly it, get on it, go down that ladder out of the cockpit into the cargo hold during a flight, and it rattling and shaking all over the place. But it's quite a bird.
Okay, so let's jump over to the navigation side. So when you started flying, what were your standard navigational tools, both your onboard as well as what was out there?
Celestial.
Okay.
Radios for positioning and DR. There was Loran.
Okay. Yep.
Very early, and it got improved over the years, so much more accurate and easy to interpret than it was initially. And we always had a Loran on the 124 and the 141. C-5 didn't. C-5 was internal radar, radar.
The
internal navigation.
Initial nav. Yeah.
And you have backup with Celestial still. And so nowadays they don't even use a Navigator. I guess probably about 15, 20 years they don't use one at all.
No kidding.
It's all
GPS.
Yep.
And the pilot can handle it himself.
Can handle it all himself, yeah. But one of the great experiences I had a lot of fun with was back in 124s. We were flying from Bermuda to the Azores one day, and when the long trip, the pilots would get up once in a while and they'd grab a cup of coffee and come back and they'd set the coffee cup down on my mat. The navigation table was right back behind the pilot.
Right.
And they'd walk back to the
flight deck,
to the flight deck or the head someplace and put down their cup. And one time we were flying along out there, and the pilot had gone, and came back up and sat down, and pretty soon it was pretty clear, and I started giving the pilot's headings. I said, do you want to turn to 120 degrees? And he turned up for a while, and I said, what do you want to turn to 90 degrees?
Mm-hmm.
And then do you want to 45 degrees? He said, there's nothing up there. Where the hell are you going? And I said, I'm navigating around your coffee cup.
So I ended up in an ugly navigational situation as a JG one night, taking over the watch. Sorted it out. Didn't call the captain. That's another story. But what's kind of your worst story as far as being navigator? Bad weather,
one of them was again between Bermuda and the Azores, and we got into weather. And one of the problems with Loran is you ran an antenna out of the airplane. You had to wait on one end and go out.
Trailing wire. Yep.
You get trailing wire antenna, but they had a habit of spinning and eventually breaking off.
Okay.
And then you lose your Loran.
Right. So now you're back to DR.
You're back in celestial, but you're in clouds.
Correct.
And you go through 8 or 9 hours with really no fixing, just DRs.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you're a nighttime, you can't use the drift meter. You look down at the waves or at the land and lined up how you're drifting.
Okay.
So it was a telescope down through the floor of the
Okay, I've
airplane.
never heard of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's called a drift meter. You could calculate the angle you were going, and you could do a ground speed at the same time with the stopwatch. Between. But if it was nighttime, you didn't have that.
Okay, so it was raw, just plain old DR by the seat of your pants.
And I remember that one trip to the Azores, and we were about 8 hours without a fix, and finally broke out. And
so is that with an antenna missing?
An antenna missing
okay,
too.
so
yeah,
when you finally broke out.
Finally broke out in Celestial, and I was about probably 100 miles off course going into the Azores, and they're pretty small out there. But this is where, and we eventually would have gotten the radio beacons. There are beacons on lodges, but it still saved your tail more than once.
Yeah.
Pretty neat.
So you never saw any GPS in your time, or just inertial nav and Loran. How about Omega? Did you guys ever use Omega?
We never used Omega.
Okay, because we
had
that.
Omni and things like that, but they were limited distance. But for out of the long distances, it was pretty basic.
Yeah. We had Loran when I came in. Omega came in.
Yeah.
GPS was just starting to hit the fleet there in the 90s, mid 90s, believe it or not.
But even with Loran, you always tried to cross it with a celestial bearing or two to just cross-check everything. You didn't believe anything.
Well, back to no navigators on airplanes is several years back, the Navy quit training officers how to use a sextant.
Yeah.
And they don't do celestial, but we had the day's work in navigation was you shoot morning stars, you'd shoot morning sunline, local apparent noon, and afternoon sunline, and then evening stars. That was considered a day's work.
Yeah.
And now apparently they don't even do most of that because they got GPS.
Yeah.
It's like, but if GPS goes away, so I'm sure they still teach them DR, but for God's sakes, that's pretty basic.
Yeah.
GPS, and GPS. I'm not sure what they've
done. But it was a lot of fun, and of course, I always like to say that people would say, "What'd you do? Were you a pilot?" And I said, "No, I was a navigator, but I told pilots where to go."
There you go.
That's it.
Yeah, I was just thinking yesterday, like I was, I was in the Uber of the Navy.
Yep.
We took people places.
Yep.
Not necessarily directly. We escorted taking them places there, and pilots are the Uber of bombs.
Yeah.
So. All right, so then you finally retired.
I retired, and I went to Sanibel Island,
and that was via one of your Air Force buddies.
A neighbor in Somerville, South Carolina, the next door neighbor, Larry Snell and his wife were neighbors. He was a retired Army colonel, and they went to Sanibel when I was still in in the service from Charleston. And when I retired, they contacted me and said Larry was head of the small water company down there in Sanibel Island, and he could use an office manager. And so I went to Sanibel. And I went there in '75, and I was there until about 2000 in the water company.
Right.
And
Island Water.
Island Water. And it was the first, it was an electrodialysis plant, which was actually a showcase. We had people from all over the world interested in ED type water systems to come there, mostly Arabians, but a lot of them.
Sure, sure. So how, I hadn't heard of ED. We got reverse osmosis. And,
reverse osmosis was second. ED was a system where it put through plates of membranes and electrical charges and would desalinate the water. And
what was your capacity per day?
We had about, I think it was, we had two 5 million gallon tanks, but we could put out about 800,000 gallons a day. And you fill up for the high peak seasons, keep the tanks full.
Right. And you supplied Sanibel Island itself?
Sanibel and Captiva Islands.
Okay.
Yeah. And then in about 1980, we went to reverse osmosis because ED wasn't as efficient. Reverse osmosis was becoming more efficient.
Yeah, and that's what I understand they have on all the ships now.
Yeah.
So I had the old steam evaporators, and
I have it in the house in Missoula now.
Oh, okay.
In our own system. Yeah.
Okay, and then you retired from there and became a man of leisure.
Yeah, I retired from there in
2000.
2000. Actually, it was 1999. I retired. Came up here to Ormond Beach in 2000, and took a motor trip out to the West Coast, and went by Missoula, Montana to see an old friend of mine from high school. And when I was there, he said, we still have a pretty active high school group from our graduation class, and we'll be having our 50th high school reunion in a couple of years. Why don't you come back for that? And so I did. And when at the cocktail party, I met the young lady that's standing over there. Off camera right now.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history. We got married, and I went to Missoula, Montana, and loved it, and still there.
Okay, now, and I remember back in '99, came down to your house in Fort Myers, and you had those incredible speaker systems.
Yeah.
And I know you and another guy were in business doing that.
We imported, a guy by the name of Steve Davis, and he was very active in the high-end audio business, and we went into partnership and in business together, and imported mostly European audio gear, different products, and I always had a pretty nice sound system in the house.
Yeah,
and I loved it.
I did. I remember you that day we were there. It was like you said, this rack of equipment is $70,000, and that was the turntable, the amplifiers, the speakers, and the gold-plated braided
cables and everything.
Cabling to connect it all together. That was the most incredible audio experience I've ever had.
I still have a pretty good one. It's not that big. Still love music, classical, opera, stuff like that.
And I remember Keith years ago telling me how much fun it was when you took him out to CES.
Yeah.
As part of your display system.
I think Eric and Becky came out, and Keith came out in Las Vegas for the CES show. We had a lot of fun out there, and that was part of the benefits of the business. Sure, it was good.
Yeah.
But when things started to crash, the economy, people weren't buying high-end audio. And
of course, now it's all completely.
It's all changed.
There's still a couple of analog people out there that love it, but it's all digital now. And of course, that technology.
Sure is.
But we're losing the analog engineers.
Yeah.
And the input signal to everything is still analog only.
Yeah, and it's you'd be surprised the people that still go back and say that 33 will sound better than any CD ever made.
Mm-hmm.
I can't hear it with my ears now, but
Yeah.
but they claim that, and they really knew how to record music in those days.
Yeah. And then my buddy does the high-end audio.
Yeah.
It's like he puts in, because he's done big venues, he does
Yeah.
home theater systems, but talk to him, it's like the .AAC format
Yeah.
is, if you play an MP3 on a high-end stereo system, it really sounds like trash, on our phones or whatever.
Right.
But he had to school some people by some other guys who were putting in the system, and the owner's going, this is garbage, this is garbage, and he came in and basically said, no, you've got to play lossless digital audio.
Yeah.
And then you do recapture that sound, whereas an MP3 is compressed and you just lose so much quality, even though, on small devices you don't
Can't hear
notice
it.
Yeah. So
for sure.
anyway, all right, those are some interesting adventures.
Well, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we
Been a good
got
life.
we got your military record down there for as well as your grown up years and why you came in service, and a little bit of fun detail about some of those aircraft from days gone by.
Yeah, if I could recall some more, I'll let you know. It could be.
Well, we'll crank out this audio,
Yeah.
and then whenever they watch it, they'll have a little more context to what Uncle Jack did.
There you go.
Okay.
That's great, Kurt. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
One day we're going to have to get Eric to do the same thing.
There you go. That'll be interesting.